now we've described the 5 main areas of ourself. We have our sense that we exist, what we include in our identity, how we describe our identity in words, how we present ourselves to others, and how we feel or evaluate what's in our self-concept based on how far away it is from our ideal self. Now we're going to jump into the faded bubble down the lower right about how all of this develops and how it changes over different ages in the lifespan. And so we know the development of the self is this really fascinating idea, and overall we find that it starts off really basic and gets a lot more detailed all the way up to late adolescence. So we're going to jump into talking about infancy. Now it's important that up to now we've largely talked about how the self can be studied through philosophy, social anthropology, social work, and social psychology. A social developmental psychologist that's really important to highlight in this unit is Susan Harter. And almost everything we're going to talk about in this development unit is really coming from her work. And so Susan Harter is the main social developmentalist who studies identity and the self and self-competence in infants, children, and adolescents. So in infancy, how do we know kids start to develop a sense of themselves? Well, this realizing that not everything is you and realizing that the mom is separate is something that takes time. Around 18 months of age, this is when infants can first pass the mirror test. This is when they take a little red marker and they color the infant's nose red and plop them down in front of a mirror. If the infant doesn't have a sense of self or doesn't recognize themselves in the mirror, they will put their hand towards the mirror and attempt to touch the other baby in the mirror. If they recognize themselves in the mirror, they will touch their own nose. And this tends to start to happen around 18 months of age. So this lets us know that they're at least understanding what's in the mirror is them. And that's an early primitive form of self. What's really fascinating is at this age, they recognize themselves in mirrors, but not in family photos, even if the family photos were taken the same day. And so this is the idea they can't recognize themselves in group photos. They start to recognize themselves in group photos roughly around their 2nd birthday. Also around their 2nd birthday is when their first personal narrative starts to emerge. And this is very basic. They start to recognize and be able to say their name, say their age sometimes, and say their gender. And so kids are able to label things like their gender at that early age. So that's infancy, pretty basic. Then when we move into childhood, we find there's a lot of growth. Very onset of childhood in the preschool years, ages 3 or 4, we really start off with really basic things. The things that we can include in our self-concept or our self-representation tends to be physical characteristics of ourselves. We'll talk about the things we were just talking about, our name, our age, our gender, our hair color, our eye color, how many birthdays we've had. Now, aside from our basic physical and vital characteristics, we might also mention the people in our lives. We might talk about our brothers or our sisters or our pets. We might view part of our identity as our home address or our school name. Or as we get older in those preschool years, we might talk about some of our activities, like we like to dance or we like to play sports. In the early elementary years, this is when social comparisons start. This is when kids start to get that understanding of other people and they can compare themselves to other kids and start to realize what they're good at and what they're not so good at. So they'll start to say the things they're good at, like if they can run fast or if they can say the alphabet or tie their shoes or what have you. But for most of elementary school, from ages 6 to up to age 12, we tend to see kids really describe themselves in concrete ways, and they give really descriptive information about who they are on the outside. Their self-concept is very much linked with their social reputation. They don't have too much of an internal voice. For instance, something I found that I had written when I was 7 is the following. My name is Kathleen. I am 7 years old. I am in grade 2. I like to write stories. I have 2 sisters and a brother. I have long black hair and brown eyes. I have a dog named Frankie who is black. So that's really who I thought I was. I was my hair color, my eye color, and the fact that I had a dog, my grade in school. And so that's not the really abstract internal stuff yet. It's really tied to our social reputation. It's really tied to our vital statistics. So that's who we think we are as kids. How do we feel about it? How do we evaluate our self-esteem? Well, Harter's work has showed that childhood self-competence really makes some drastic changes at the onset of elementary. Because in elementary school we're able to compare ourselves to other kids, this is very different than what happened in preschool. In preschool, we were more interested in how our parents rewarded us, and if our parents said we were good kids, we thought we were good, and that's as simple as it was. But once we started elementary, we started to realize, oh, this kid knew the answers faster than I did, and this kid said something better than what I did, and they colored this picture better than me. and they won this game in gym class. So then our self-esteem starts to take a nosedive. It's very typical and it's very normal, and it's when we start to adjust. And this may be that we had our self-concept was a little bit inaccurate. We thought we were the best at everything, and now we're revising our self-concept and we realize it's a little bit spread out from our ideal self. And that's okay. That's getting more realistic at this point. We don't want any kids to be very depressed or have low self-esteem, but it tends to go from I'm the best at everything on a 5-point scale to I'm somewhat okay on a 3 on a 5-point scale. And the types of ways that kids tend to evaluate themselves tends to be in 3 main domains. When they compare themselves to others, they tend to compare how good they are at school, how good they are at sports, and how good they are in making friends. So it's really their scholastic, athletic, and social competence domains that they tend to evaluate themselves. Now we find that not all kids are going to be good at everything, but if they're good at least one of these things, it can make them feel pretty good and can buffer them. Though if they realize that they're very low on one of these, it can be very harmful to their self-esteem or to their self-evaluation. Now, as we move from childhood to adolescence, things do get more complex. In early adolescence, this is when we see parts of that more internal self-concept start to make our way into our personal narratives. So in early adolescence, when we ask a child to describe themselves, they might get more evaluative. They include abstract, not just concrete things, and they start to generalize. They might just talk about one thing they're good at. They might talk about a whole area of things they're good at. And we start to see there's a lot of stability, and they're still confident in who they are. They know who they are, even if they don't like who they are at this age. So an example that I wrote that from my childhood was, I really like school because I'm good at writing and math. I like helping people in class. I also like to run public speeches. Sometimes I get frustrated. So there's a talk about, I wrote this when I was in grade 6, so frustrated, that may not be something I want to have in my public persona or my social reputation, but helping people in class, I like helping people in class. That might not have been something people knew about me. So you can see this is also getting more evaluative. I'm writing that I'm good at things, and so kids will try and evaluate themselves and include that evaluative wording in their personal narratives. And they'll also start to generalize. If they like animals, if they generally like being around animals, if they generally like to skateboard, if they're a good gamer. That being said, in early adolescence, when we think about our self-esteem, we find one of the big changes in self-esteem here is it becomes very gendered. We find that kids that are more masculine, they tend to get a bit of a spike in self-esteem in early adolescence, and kids that are more feminine tend to get a sharper decrease in self-esteem. So it tends to go in 2 different directions based on one's gender identity. We also find the domains that they base their self-esteem on become more complex. Rather than kids just looking at their smarts, their sports, and their social lives, adolescents tend to look at 7 different domains. And the most important domain we find for young adolescents is their appearance. They weigh that one the most heavily. This is the idea, do they have acne? Do they have body hair? Are they concerned about their weight? Are they concerned about their muscularity? We also know after appearance, they put a lot of weight in terms of the romantic relationships. Do they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? Even if they're not sexually active, even if their notion of a boyfriend or a girlfriend is, playing in the park and playing video games together, they desire the status of being in a romantic relationship at this age. So having that can make them feel really good about themselves. After romantic relationships, they put a lot of stock in their friendships. Are they accepted by their friends? Do they have people they can talk to? Do they have people they can hang out with? And tied with friendship there is their social status. Are they considered popular at school? Are they considered uncool at school? Do people notice them? Do they feel like they belong in the school setting? Moving on, then they put some weight in their academics. Are they smart? Do they do good? And their athletics, are they good at sports? And finally, their health. At this age, health is primarily concerned with, do they have to spend a lot of time in hospital, or are they sort of a typically healthy kid and they can do all the things other kids can do? So if they're a child with disabilities, or if they're a child who has to go to the hospital for dialysis or chemotherapy, that's something that could really impact their self-esteem at this point.